Hey humans, it's Hannah. Welcome back to the channel. Or if you're new here, we do videos on creepy and disturbing things here. Don't mind my arm. Winnie's sitting next to me and you can't see her in the camera, but my arm is scratching her belly. That's all that's happening over here. Today we're talking about a man named Anatoly Moskvin and his very creepy doll collection. And if you've never heard this story before, you will have no idea what's coming. We're going to get right into it. However, this video does kindly have a sponsor, so we're going to roll to that and I will be right back with you. This video is kindly sponsored by Hungryroot. Hungryroot has been a huge help in my life. I have received many boxes from them now, and there is just nothing quite like getting a box of groceries and recipes delivered right to your door. Start by taking their fun, personalized quiz, and Hungryroot will cater your boxes to your responses. Take what they recommend or pick exactly what you want. They send you groceries with easy 10-minute recipes that you can make with what they send, but you don't have to. You can make whatever you'd like with the groceries as well. For me, Hungryroot knows that I don't like prep and I don't like a lot of cleanup, so they send me a lot of quick bites and snacks and some just really easy throw together meals. But if you have different needs than me, they'll work with that. Do you want new recipes? Do you want to eat more plants? Do you want to just save money? They'll make it happen. Are you vegan, vegetarian, gluten-free, can't do dairy? They can make a box for that too. Hungryroot has over 2,000 recipes to discover, and with that, you get to skip the grocery shopping and create less food waste. They also have really cool predictive technology, so the more boxes you get, the more personalized Hungryroot's recommendations will get to you. The first 100 people to use my code HannahTheHorrible40 will get 40% off your first grocery order with Hungryroot. Use the link in the show notes or scan the QR code and use code HannahTheHorrible40 to get 40% off. Anatoly Moskvin was a strange man to those around him. Though he was a little peculiar, he was still considered by his family and all that knew him to be harmless. In 2011, 45-year-old Anatoly was still living with his parents. However, that was his preference. He was quite the loner. He had never dated anybody up until this time. He never drank, though. He never smoked. And like I said, he lived with his parents, Elvira and Yuri, in their pretty small apartment. Anatoly and his parents lived in the 5th largest city in Russia, called Nizhny Novgorod. Anatoly was a journalist, he was a historian, he was a published author and a professor. He also was fluent in 13 different languages. So as you can deduce, the guy was smart as hell. Even though he lived in this small apartment with his parents, he did actually travel quite a bit. So he did get out of the house quite a bit because he was a journalist. So he traveled in order to be a good journalist. Anatoly's secluded life, though, was not the only reason that people found him a little strange, his parents included. Anatoly's fascination with dolls was a huge part of his life. Anatoly had a huge collection of dolls, and he wasn't going off and finding them in antique shops and stores. He was making them himself. They weren't these small little dolls that sat on a shelf either. He preferred to make dolls that were rather human-sized, sometimes child-sized, sometimes adult-sized. And again, they weren't just for display. He would sit them around the house on tables and stacks of clutter and stuff as if they were kind of part of the family. But it didn't stop there. His dolls were always dressed in nice, bright clothing, some of them wearing makeup, which was often nail polish he used for makeup, and he would put long boots on them. Their hands and other parts would be wrapped lovingly in cloth. He would put wigs on them. Some of Anatoly's dolls even played music because he would insert little music boxes in them during the creation process. Anatoly's parents, like we touched on, Yuri and Elvira, they were both in their 70s. They were not a huge fan of their son's large collection of dolls. It really creeped them out. The way he painted their waxy faces just gave them a weird feeling. Sometimes it felt like the dolls were haunted. Then it got even creepier because his parents would sometimes overhear him, or sometimes he would do it with his parents, where he would talk to the dolls as if they were people. He would sing to them. He would put them next to him on the couch and have them watch TV with him. He would throw the dolls literal birthday parties, like actually make them a cake, sing them happy birthday with his parents and stuff like that. He would involve the dolls in their holiday celebrations. Remember, Anatoly was very, very lonely and very secluded. Other than his work, he didn't really get out of the house. He never dated. He was just so isolated. And so to his parents, although it creeped them out, it made a lot of sense because it was like he was making his own companionship. They also just loved their son. They knew that it was just a huge passion of his, these dolls. And so even though, again, they weren't a huge fan, they allowed him to continue and they allowed him to keep the dolls in their house. So Anatoly never goes anywhere, seems very isolated to his parents. He doesn't socialize that much. He doesn't get out of the house other than to work. So imagine Yuri and Elvira's surprise when in November 2011, police show up at their door. Turns out Anatoly was hiding a very dark secret, not only from his parents, but from the world. Police come in and they are searching the apartment and examining the dolls. And then to Elvira and Yuri's horror, suddenly the police take one of these wax masks. That's right, it wasn't really the doll, but a mask off one of the dolls. Under the mask was not a doll face or stuffing or cloth, but a human face. Turns out Anatoly was not a doll collector, but a corpse collector and a pretty notorious grave robber. Originally, it was reported that police had found 29 dolls/humans in this family's apartment, but this information was later corrected to actually 26 bodies. They were all women and girls, ranging anywhere from 3 years old to 25 years old. One of the corpses, the oldest one, Anatoly had had for 9 years before he was caught. Anatoly, turns out, was desecrating graves from local cemeteries, taking corpses, and then mummifying the corpses that he collected with a combination of baking soda and salt. He then hid the bodies. This would dry them out and mummify them. He would then hide them in a safe place close to the cemeteries until they were preserved. Once they were mummified and ready, for lack of a better word, he would bring them back to his home and make them into dolls. Dress them, that's why all their limbs were wrapped up in cloth, making them faces out of wax masks, sometimes other things, putting makeup on them, wigs, hats, and then treating them as if they were his own children. Hence the birthday parties, holidays, and spending quality time with them. But it only gets even worse than that. Anatoly later revealed that he had more plans for the dolls. He had planned to eventually bring them back to life too. So let's back up here for just a moment, because obviously there's a story here. Anatoly had a pretty interesting childhood. He was born on September 1st, 1966, and I cannot confirm this 100% because I could only find one source that claimed this, but Anatoly had allegedly been essayed as a child by a stranger, by a man who he didn't know, when he was about 8 or 9. Not a great start. His morbid curiosities and his curiosity in not only death but corpses started in 1979. In 1979, Anatoly was only 13 years old. Now, again, there's also no proof that this happened other than Anatoly's word, but according to one of the articles that he wrote, in fact, it was an article he wrote in October, a month before he was arrested for having these bodies in his homes, where he recounted a story that happened to him. When he was 13, Anatoly claims that a group of men in suits approached him while he was walking home from school. They were all close to a funeral. The men were in suits because they were about to attend the funeral of 11-year-old Natasha Petrova. And according to Anatoly, these men dragged him to Natasha's coffin and forced him to kiss her corpse multiple times. Natasha's mother then put a wedding ring on both Natasha's finger and Anatoly's finger. If this indeed happened, now again, this is speculation, I have no idea, but I can only imagine that this is some sort of ritual in whatever religion they practiced, where because Natasha was only 11 when she passed away, she didn't have a chance to grow into an adult and get married, which I would imagine in their culture was probably important. And so they were fulfilling some kind of ritual where they found a young boy who would be about Natasha's age and then kind of marrying them in Natasha's death so that she could still have that part of her life, even though she passed before that. Again, I have no idea. I can only imagine based on context that that is what is going on here. I understand cultural religious practices and rituals, but not okay to do this to a 13-year-old boy, because for most children that would be a traumatizing, confusing, and likely upsetting event. And while I have no doubt that it was traumatizing in a way for Anatoly, for him it just made his curiosity in death and dead people very heightened. That's kind of where his obsession started, was this event. Not only that, but this incident made him believe in the occult and magic. After this event, in his teen years, Anatoly went on to start exploring cemeteries on his own. This fascination and arguably obsession continued into adulthood. As he became the well-known genius and scholar that his colleagues and family knew and loved, he was also exploring every cemetery in Nizhny Novgorod. In fact, between the years 2005 and 2007, Anatoly claimed that he carefully studied 752 graves across 40 cemeteries. Like I said, 2005 to 2007, he would have been in his early 40s. He claimed that in order to do this, he walked upwards of 20 miles every single day. He would drink water from puddles and simply sleep on hay bales in order to not go home, basically, to have more time to do this. One night, he even slept in a person's coffin that he found, as their funeral had been scheduled for the next day. He did this, though, not only for his obsession, but also under the guise of work, as he was a journalist. So he would document his excursions and his explorations through journalism, and it even claims that he documented them. Like, it kind of implied that he took video footage, but I could not find any of the proof of the video footage. So Anatoly is going around obsessed with cemeteries and carefully exploring and studying hundreds and hundreds of graves. It was in 2009, a couple years before he was arrested, that locals started to report to authorities that their loved ones' graves had been desecrated or sometimes robbed, their bodies robbed from their graves altogether. The loved one had been buried very recently, so I would imagine they were going to visit the graves still quite frequently, so they noticed pretty quickly. Authorities at first assumed that it must have been the work of extremist groups, and for the next 2 years they would try to investigate these grave robberies and try to figure out who was doing this. But they came up empty-handed, and for the next 2 years until 2011, this all remained a mystery. In 2011, one of Moscow's airports was the victim of a terrorist attack. So police in the Nizhny Novgorod area were getting reports from Muslim families during this time saying that their Muslim loved ones' graves were being vandalized. Not the bodies stolen, but vandalized. They were investigating a cemetery where photos of Muslims on their grave sites had been painted over, like their faces were painted over. This is where police ran into Anatoly. He was at a Muslim cemetery. This part, I'm going to be super honest, is extremely confusing, and I don't have a clear answer for it because I read through quite a few sources and they all either say different things or they're like seemingly purposely vague about the matter. I have no idea if Anatoly was actually the one vandalizing these Muslim graves, like if he was racist and was vandalizing these Muslim graves, or if that was just how police caught him because the police were in the cemeteries more often and he happened to be in one of the cemeteries when the police were trying to investigate the vandalisms. So the sources seem to indicate that he was originally charged for these and caught vandalizing the Muslim graves. However, the charges were then later dropped. So to be honest, I don't really know if he was actually doing the vandalizing or not. And I don't think it would be fair to say that he absolutely was when the sources are so unclear. Either way, he was acting weird in the cemetery, and I believe they were probably just going to arrest anybody who was not grieving a family in the cemetery during this time to try to find the vandals. And so Anatoly was arrested on the spot, and he was brought back to his home where they started to investigate. And you know the rest. Police took a video of Anatoly's home and what they found and the way the dolls were positioned. It's only a couple minutes, so I'm going to play that clip for you now.
Это что здесь эти делал, да?
Да, из трупов кукол.
То есть и глину там, да?
Да.
Там все девочки, да?
Ну, как правило.
Одежда. Что это? Квартира с
Вечерние съемки. Ноги. Да.
Кто делает?
А? Он сам.
А кто он сам-то не видит?
So in his apartment, police found not only these dolls, but they also found other pretty damning evidence. They found detailed notes that Anatoly wrote on how to make the dolls. They found maps of the cemeteries that were near his home. They also found photos, plaques, and other pieces that Anatoly had stolen from random grave sites. Then footprints near some of the desecrated graves were also found, and they matched the shoes in Anatoly's apartment. So it was, of course, pretty obvious who had done this. Anatoly's motives, later he said, were pretty clear. He was very honest about his motives. He said that the reason he did this was mostly out of sheer loneliness. He denies to this day that he treated any of the dolls or had any sexual feelings for the dolls. He claimed that the primary motive was that he wanted to be a dad. He wanted a child someday, but he had never dated. So that never came into fruition. And so he had these dolls because he saw them as his children, specifically as his daughters. At one point, he even tried to adopt a real child on his own. But as you saw in the video, he kind of had a hoarding situation. His place was small, not really fit for a child, and he just had low income as well. And so Russian authorities denied his application to adopt. And then I think his parents, while they, put up with his stuff, I don't think his parents were perfect either. I think I'm kind of inferring this based on what I've heard and read. I don't know for sure, but in my opinion, they were not always the kindest, and they were kind of like a little too happy that he got rejected for this. I can understand why they wouldn't want him to adopt a child and bring it into their home, but it just seemed a little bit cruel that they were reportedly very happy that he got denied. So anyway, Anatoly is very sad and lonely. And then on top of that, he has an interest in the occult. And he also was an expert in Celtic cultures, which in Celtic culture, there was ancient druids that slept on the graves of loved ones in order to communicate with the loved ones. So it turns out Anatoly was researching recently deceased children and young adults that were close to him, and he would read through their obituaries, and then he would choose his next victim based on if the obituary particularly spoke to him. He would then go to the cemetery. He would then sleep on that child child or woman's grave in order to communicate with the victim and find out if they wanted to come with him to be brought back to life. He claimed that he only ever took a corpse if, after sleeping on their grave, they told him through their spirit that they wanted to be taken. Eventually, it was hard to sleep on the ground, so he would have to stop this part of the ritual, but many times he did do this. So that's why he needed to mummify and preserve them and then put them in pretty masks, not only to hide them, but he wanted to give them like pretty faces and bodies and everything while they were waiting for him to learn the right occult rituals and spells and stuff like that so that he could eventually bring them back to life. Anatoly claimed that he knew that what he was doing was technically against the law, but he just couldn't help it because he believed he was truly rescuing these children, and he felt that the good of what he had intended was more important than the law. Now, if it hasn't become clear by now, and this will not be a shocker to most of you, but Anatoly, after being arrested, was diagnosed with a form of paranoid schizophrenia. Now, I am not a mental health professional by any stretch of the imagination, mind you, but it seems implied that this was the reason he truly believed that these corpses could speak to him. And it would also make sense because they didn't let him go to trial. They found him not mentally fit for trial. So the court decided that he needed psychiatric help, not prison. Anatoly was put into a mental health facility and he's been held there ever since. In September 2018, his doctors did try to petition for him to be released. They said that he was getting better and they wanted to release him from the hospital so that he would have to continue his psychiatric treatment, but he could do it outpatient, meaning he could do it from home by going to appointments and stuff like that, and not having to be held in the psychiatric hospital. However, in February 2019, they revoked it. They decided that he actually was not ready after another evaluation, and the hospital said, never mind, he has to stay here. And as far as I could find, Anatoly has been in the psychiatric hospital ever since. And to be honest, I feel like probably that's the best right now because, again, I agree with the court that he was not fit for trial, that he was very much struggling with mental health issues, and that psychiatric help was probably the best way to go. Now, I do want to be very clear that just because I don't want to make it sound like I'm super sympathetic to him because he had a lot of victims in this. And while his mental health diagnoses and all that are not his fault, as we've discussed and many people discuss, your mental health struggles are never your fault, but they are your responsibility. And he, instead of getting help and instead of I would argue instead of his parents getting him help, like I'm sure he was showing some symptoms, he did not get the help. And instead he did something that harmed a lot of families and hurt a lot of people. While he did not kill anyone, all these families had lost their very young loved one. And shortly after putting them to rest, their bodies disappeared and they didn't know what happened to them. That would be so devastating in itself, but then to learn that the person taking their loved ones from their eternal resting place was making them into objects and playing with them as if they're dolls would be beyond devastating. 10-year-old Natalia Shardimova, excuse my pronunciation, was the first victim of Anatoly. She was, just 10-year-old baby was stolen by Anatoly, and she was the one who was with Anatoly for 9 whole years, almost as long as her mother got her before she passed. And her mother believes that Anatoly should spend life in prison for what he did. While I don't agree, I do recognize that I have never been in this position, and I can totally understand where she's coming from. I do think he needed psychiatric help. I don't think he would have been fit for trial, but if I was a mom and that happened to me, I think I would feel the same way. So I can totally understand where she's coming from. And that is going to do it for today's video. It was a weird one, a little different than we normally do, huh? So yeah, don't forget our sponsor, Hungry Root. Thank you so much for sponsoring today's video, Hungry Root. And I will see you guys all in the next one. Thank you so much to all of our patrons on the screen. Our top tiers, as always, are Colin Holmes, The Deck of Cards, Michelle Valdovinos, Tom L., Little Kittle Cat, Mitchell Schaefer-Meyer, Mike, Alice Paul, Brittany Phillips, Momo Neon, Marita144, Sage K, Elderly Hipster, The Puppy Hag, Rebecca Jackson, Toby, Carter, Kawakan Anime and Gaming Convention, Sarah the Crazy Fish Lady, Maxie, Ellison Luna, Tiny Mighty Bookworm, A Bunny Apparently, Leon Vanek, Elliot Fink, I Am In Your Walls, Hapromania, Cyberdog Investigations LLC, Vicky Cat, Amy B, Take Gerch, Dead Without the E, Ball, Olivezilla, Chara, MH Dave, Ami, Lindsay R, Miss T, Lou Raccoon, Shayna R, El Magnificoco, Victor Schmiel, Laura Winter, Lilith, Dana, Ashes, Arsic Ghost, Gosh Zilla, Gabriella L, Arya Anomaly, Ghostly Girl, Mel Miller, Jessica Cook, and our newest, Mark Fagundes.